I'm Leah, 27, an elementary school teacher from Portland. When doctors diagnosed me with a rare kidney condition requiring expensive surgery, I never imagined my own parents would refuse to help. They had the money, but chose to fund my sister Megan's extravagant wedding instead. "Your surgery can wait. Her wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event," my mother said as my father nodded in agreement. That moment changed everything about how I understood family love and my place in their lives. Before I share my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Drop a comment letting me know if you've ever had to choose between your health and someone else's celebration. Your stories help us all feel less alone. Growing up in Lexington, a wealthy suburb just outside Boston, our family appeared picture perfect from the outside. My father, Robert, built a successful career as an investment banker, while my mother, Eleanor, managed our home with meticulous care. Our colonial-style house, with its manicured lawn and seasonal decorations, could have been featured in a magazine. We took annual vacations to Martha's Vineyard, had new cars every few years, and never worried about money for extracurricular activities or college funds. But beneath this veneer of suburban perfection ran an undercurrent that shaped my childhood in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. My sister Megan, 3 years older than me, was undeniably the golden child of our family. From an early age, the disparity in how we were treated was subtle but consistent. Megan was stunning even as a child, tall with naturally blonde hair and our mother's blue eyes. I took after my father's side with brown hair and hazel eyes average height, and a build that my mother often described as sturdy. Where Megan was outgoing and charismatic, I was thoughtful and reserved. She collected friends effortlessly. I preferred books and quiet corners. "Megan's just like me at her age," my mother would say proudly during her endless stream of activities: dance recitals, cheerleading competitions, beauty pageants. My parents never missed a single one, sitting front row with professional cameras and flowers ready for after the show. I still remember my 8th grade science fair where I'd spent months researching the effects of different types of light on plant growth. My project won first place, but my parents couldn't attend because it coincided with Megan's regional cheerleading competition. They left me a congratulatory note and a small box of chocolates on the kitchen counter. When I brought home my blue ribbon, my father glanced up from his newspaper with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before returning to his reading. That same evening, Megan returned with a third-place trophy from her competition. My parents took us all out to a celebratory dinner where my science fair victory went unmentioned. I don't share these memories to paint my parents as monsters. They weren't. They provided for both of us, materially ensured we had good educations, and never neglected our basic needs. But the emotional economy of our household operated on a clear hierarchy. Megan's achievements and needs simply mattered more. By high school, I had internalized this dynamic so completely that I stopped expecting equal treatment. When Megan's Sweet 16 featured a rented venue professional DJ and designer dress, I assumed my more modest party the following year was because times were tighter, as my mother explained. When she later spent twice as much on Megan's prom dress, I didn't even question it. "You're just more practical, Leah," my mother would say, as if my perceived lack of interest in the spotlight was a choice rather than an adaptation to years of being overshadowed. Despite, or perhaps because of this family dynamic, I excelled academically. School became my sanctuary, the place where my efforts were recognized and rewarded consistently. My teachers praised my writing, my analytical thinking, my patience with struggling classmates. Their validation nourished something in me that had been starved at home. When it came time for college decisions, my parents pushed for business school or pre-law, careers with prestige and financial returns. But I had found my calling in education during volunteer work at an after-school program for underprivileged children. Teaching with your grades. My father looked genuinely puzzled when I announced my decision. "That's a waste of potential, Leah. You could do anything." What he meant, of course, was anything more impressive, more lucrative. Something they could brag about at country club dinners the way they did about Megan's marketing internship at a well-known cosmetics company. But for once, I held firm. Boston University offered me a partial scholarship for their education program, and I accepted. Those 4 years gave me space to discover who I was outside my family's expectations and the constant comparison to my sister. I made genuine friends who valued me for exactly who I was. I thrived in my education courses, finding purpose in designing curriculum and connecting with student teachers. After graduation, I made another decision that surprised my family. I accepted a position at a progressive elementary school in Portland, Oregon, nearly 3,000 miles from Boston. But why so far? My mother had asked, genuinely perplexed. There are perfectly good schools here. There were, of course. But I needed distance, room to breathe and become fully myself. Portland, with its reputation for creativity, environmental consciousness, and community-focused living, called to me in ways I couldn't fully articulate to my family. So at 23, I packed 2 suitcases and flew across the country to start my new life. My modest teacher's salary meant careful budgeting. A small one-bedroom apartment shared with too many houseplants, thrift store furniture, lovingly refurbished meal planning to stretch grocery dollars. But for the first time, I was making choices based solely on what I wanted, not in reaction to or in the shadow of my family's expectations. I called home weekly visits, decreased to major holidays only, and I developed a practiced cheerfulness about my sister's accelerating career in marketing and her relationship with Bradley, the son of one of my father's golf buddies. Their courtship featured prominently in every conversation with my mother. Weekend trips to the Hamptons, Bradley's promotion at his father's investment firm, the 3-carat diamond engagement ring. I was genuinely happy for Megan. Distance had softened some of my childhood resentments, and I wanted her to have a good life. I just no longer measured my worth against hers. Or so I thought until the day my body began telling a different story, one that would force us all to reveal exactly where our family's priorities truly lay. The symptoms started so gradually I barely noticed them. Teaching first grade is physically demanding. I was constantly in motion, kneeling to help students, standing for hours, rarely taking breaks even to use the restroom. When fatigue began weighing on me more heavily than usual, I attributed it to end-of-semester exhaustion. "You're just doing too much," my colleague Amelia suggested during lunch one day, eyeing the dark circles under my eyes. "When was the last time you took a weekend completely off?" I laughed it off, but she wasn't wrong. Between teaching tutoring after school twice a week for extra income and volunteering at a weekend literacy program, I rarely gave myself downtime. Still, this tiredness felt different, bone deep and persistent despite full nights of sleep. Then came the swelling. I first noticed it when my favorite ankle boots felt uncomfortably tight. The next morning, my fingers were so puffy I struggled to remove my small pearl earrings, a college graduation gift I wore daily. Within a week, my face looked noticeably rounder in the bathroom mirror. When I developed pounding headaches that over-the-counter painkillers couldn't touch, I finally made an appointment with my primary care physician. The nurse took my blood pressure twice, frowning at the numbers before calling in the doctor. 160/95, Dr. Lynn said, removing the stethoscope from around her neck. "That's concerning for someone your age, Leah. And these other symptoms you're describing, the fatigue, the edema, we need to run some tests." The blood work and urinalysis came back with alarming results: elevated creatinine levels, protein in my urine, signs of inflammation. Dr. Lynn referred me to a nephrologist, a kidney specialist, with an urgency that sent the first real flicker of fear through my chest. I still remember the day everything changed with perfect clarity. It was a Tuesday in early March, unusually sunny for Portland. I had taken a half-day off from teaching for the nephrology appointment, assuring my principal I'd be back for the afternoon reading groups. Dr. Sharma was a petite woman with kind eyes and a direct manner. She reviewed my test results, examined me, and then ordered an ultrasound of my kidneys. I watched her face as she studied the grainy images on the screen, the slight furrow between her brows deepening. "I'd like to do a kidney biopsy," she said, after dismissing the ultrasound technician. "There are several concerning indicators here, and we need a definitive diagnosis to determine the best course of treatment." 2 days later, I was lying on an examination table, a local anesthetic numbing my lower back, as Dr. Sharma used a specialized needle to extract a tiny sample of kidney tissue. The procedure itself was quick, but left me sore and shaken more from the implications than the physical discomfort. The weekend passed in a blur of anxious waiting. I hadn't told my family about any of this yet, not wanting to worry them unnecessarily. Only Sam knew, my boyfriend of 2 years who worked as an ER nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center. We'd met when I brought a student in after a playground fall, and his gentle competence with both my frightened student and me had left an impression. Sam came over that Sunday cooking dinner while I tried to distract myself with lesson plans. "Try not to catastrophize," he advised, stirring pasta sauce at my tiny stove. "There are many treatable kidney conditions. Let's wait for the actual diagnosis." His medical knowledge was both reassuring and terrifying. He explained terms I'd heard Dr. Sharma use, walked me through possible scenarios, and held me through a crying jag when my fear finally overflowed. Monday morning, I was back in Dr. Sharma's office, sitting across from her desk, as she explained my diagnosis: focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, or FSGS, a rare condition where scar tissue develops in the kidney's filtering units, eventually causing kidney failure if left untreated. "In your case," she explained, pointing to images I couldn't decipher, "the disease is already quite advanced. I'm concerned about how rapidly your kidney function has declined." What followed was a blur of information about treatment options. Conservative management with medications might slow progression, but wouldn't reverse the damage. Dialysis would eventually become necessary if the disease continued advancing. A specialized surgical procedure could potentially remove the scarred portions and restore function, but it was expensive and not guaranteed to work. Without intervention, Dr. Sharma concluded, you're looking at complete kidney failure within 12 to 18 months, possibly sooner, given the aggressive presentation. I felt the room tilt slightly, Sam's hand steady on my shoulder, bringing me back to center. "What would you recommend?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Given your age and otherwise excellent health, I'd recommend the surgical intervention. Dr. Marcus at OHSU is pioneering this procedure specifically for FSGS patients with promising results. The recovery is difficult, but outcomes for someone your age are generally very good." Hope flickered briefly until we discussed logistics. The procedure was so specialized that many insurance companies classified it as experimental. My teacher's insurance would cover only about 30% of the costs. The remaining balance, approximately $175,000, would be my responsibility. "I can't possibly afford that," I whispered, the enormity of the number crushing the breath from my lungs. Dr. Sharma looked genuinely sympathetic. "There are payment plans, medical loans, fundraising options. And given your prognosis without intervention, I'd recommend exploring all possible resources: family, friends, community organizations." Sam drove me home in silence, both of us processing the impossible situation. My yearly salary after taxes was just under $50,000. I had some savings. About $20,000 I'd been putting away for a down payment on a small condo someday, but nothing approaching what I needed. As we sat at my kitchen table, Sam finally spoke. "You need to call your parents, Leah." I nodded, knowing he was right, but dreading the conversation. Not because I thought they would refuse. Despite our complicated history, I never doubted they would help with a genuine medical crisis. But because asking for help, especially financial help, would mean admitting vulnerability dependency. Things I'd worked so hard to move beyond in our relationship. Still, there was no choice. That evening, after Sam left for his night shift, I took a deep breath and dialed the number I still knew by heart. My hands trembled as I held the phone, listening to it ring 3 times before my mother's voice answered. "Leah, what a nice surprise. We were just talking about you at dinner last night. Weren't we, Robert?" I heard my father murmur something in the background. "Your father says hello. How are things in Portland? Still raining all the time?" Her cheerful small talk felt surreal against the weight of what I needed to discuss. I cut through her weather observations with an uncharacteristic directness. "Mom, something's happened. I need to talk to you and Dad about something serious. Is he there? Can you put the phone on speaker?" The concern in her voice seemed genuine as she called my father to the phone. "Robert, come quickly. Leah says something's happened." I heard shuffling, then my father's deeper voice. "Leah, what's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" The question stung slightly. his immediate assumption that I'd done something wrong rather than had something happen to me, but I pushed past it. I've been diagnosed with a serious kidney condition. I began, then methodically explained everything I'd learned from Dr. Sharma. I described the symptoms, the diagnosis, the prognosis without surgery, keeping my voice as steady and factual as possible. The silence on the other end when I finished was brief but noticeable. "My God, Leah, that sounds very serious." My father finally said, his businesslike tone not quite masking his concern. "This specialist is confident in her diagnosis." "Yes, completely. The biopsy results are definitive." "And there's no other treatment option? Something more conventional?" my mother asked. I explained again about conservative management versus surgical intervention, about dialysis being a temporary measure at best, about the long-term prognosis without the surgery. "I see," my father said slowly. "And your insurance won't cover this procedure. They'll cover about 30%. The rest would be out of pocket, about $175,000. Another silence, longer this time. "That's a substantial amount," my father finally said, his voice now carrying the careful tone he used when discussing financial matters. "Have you looked into payment plans, medical loans?" "The hospital offers payment plans, but even stretched over 5 years, the monthly amount would be more than my rent, and medical loans have extremely high interest rates." I paused, then forced myself to continue. "I have some savings, but nowhere near enough. I was wondering if you might be able to help me." The words hung in the air between us, 3,000 miles of telephone wire carrying my vulnerability across the country. "Of course we want to help, sweetheart," my mother said quickly. "It's just, this is a lot to take in. We need to think about what's possible." "Your timing is a bit complicated," my father added, his voice taking on the slightly defensive tone I recognized from childhood disappointments. "With Megan's wedding coming up, we've already allocated significant funds." My sister's engagement to Bradley had been announced 6 months earlier, with the wedding planned for early June at an exclusive coastal resort in Maine. My mother had called weekly with updates on venues, flowers, dress fittings, each element more extravagant than the last. "I understand," I said, though I didn't really. How could a wedding, even my sister's, be mentioned in the same breath as a potentially life-saving surgery? "But this is urgent. Doctor Sharma wants to schedule the procedure within the next month if possible, before my kidney function deteriorates further." "Let us discuss this and look at our finances," my father said. "We'll call you back in a few days." That call ended with vague reassurances of their love and concern, but without any concrete commitment. I hung up feeling uneasy, but tried to remain hopeful. Surely, once they processed the seriousness of the situation, they would find a way to help. The next week passed in an anxious blur. I continued teaching, not wanting to use my limited sick days until absolutely necessary. Sam checked in constantly, his medical background making him acutely aware of what declining kidney function could mean. Dr. Sharma's office called twice, hoping to schedule the surgery. When my parents finally called back, it was my mother alone on the line, her voice carrying a carefully constructed sympathy that immediately sent warning signals through me. "Leah, your father and I have discussed your situation extensively." She began as if my health crisis were a business proposal. "We want to help, you know we do. But we've reviewed our finances, and with the commitments we've already made to Megan's wedding, we simply don't have the liquidity right now for something of this magnitude." I sat down hard on my couch, disbelief washing over me. "Mom, we're talking about my health. My kidneys are failing." "I understand that, sweetheart. But can't you do the dialysis thing for now? Just until after the wedding, then maybe we could look at helping with the surgery later in the year." The casual way she suggested postponing critical medical care for a wedding reception made me momentarily speechless. "Mom, dialysis isn't a solution. It's a stopgap measure, and the longer we wait, the less likely the surgery is to fully restore function. This can't wait for Megan's convenient wedding timeline." "Don't be dramatic, Leah," she replied, her voice cooling several degrees. "People live on dialysis for years. And frankly, your father and I feel that you should explore other options before asking us to compromise the plans we've made for your sister." "What other options?" I asked, my own voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. Well, you could take out loans. Or start one of those online fundraisers. Your father thinks that's what people in your situation typically do. My situation. As if my medical crisis were somehow a result of poor planning or bad choices. Or you could ask your school community, she continued. I'm sure they'd rally around you. That's the nice thing about your profession. Teachers are always so supportive of each other. The unspoken comparison hung in the air, unlike Megan's corporate world where apparently supportive colleagues weren't a given. And Leah, she added, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was gentle candor. This is partly why your father and I were concerned about your career choice. Teaching is rewarding, I'm sure, but the financial security just isn't there for emergencies like this. I felt a surge of anger so intense it momentarily overshadowed my fear and disappointment. So this is my fault, because I chose to educate children instead of chase money. That's not what I meant, she backpedaled. Just that if you had followed your father's advice about business school, you might have better insurance or more savings to handle this yourself. The conversation deteriorated from there, with my increasingly desperate attempts to convey the seriousness of my condition met with vague sympathies and suggestions that I was overreacting. We ended the call with nothing resolved, my mother promising to keep thinking about solutions, but making no commitments. I sat in stunned silence after hanging up, then called Megan directly. Despite our complicated history, she was still my sister. Surely she would understand the gravity of the situation once I explained it to her. Her response was worse than my parents'. Leah, I'm sorry you're going through this, really, I am, she said after I explained everything. But you have to understand, Mom and Dad have already put down non-refundable deposits for almost everything. The venue alone was $50,000. Megan, I'm talking about a life-saving procedure. And I'm talking about the most important day of my life, she countered, her voice taking on the entitled edge I remembered from childhood arguments. Bradley's family is expecting a certain kind of wedding. His mother has invited all these society people. We can't just scale back now because you need money. I'm not asking you to cancel your wedding, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. But maybe some adjustments. Do you really need the ice sculpture cocktail bar or the fireworks display? Mom mentioned. The suggestion was met with a horrified gasp. Are you seriously asking me to compromise on my dream wedding after I've been planning this for years? I'm asking you to care that I might die without this surgery, I said bluntly. Don't be so melodramatic, she scoffed. No one's going to let you die. There are other options, dialysis, fundraisers, whatever. My wedding only happens once while your surgery can wait a few months. The casual dismissal of my health cut deeper than any childhood slight ever had. This wasn't about getting less attention or fewer presents. This was my family explicitly stating that my sister's one-day celebration took precedence over my life. The final blow came a few days later when my parents organized a family conference call ostensibly to discuss solutions together. Instead, it became a 3-against-1 intervention where they collectively explained why I was being unreasonable. The timing is just impossible, my father said. We've committed nearly $100,000 to deposits that can't be recovered. And it's not just the money, my mother added. It's Megan's special time. She's waited her whole life for this wedding. Asking her to compromise now is unfair. It would cast a shadow over everything, Megan chimed in. Everyone would be worried about you instead of celebrating us. As they continued, the subtext became increasingly clear. My medical crisis was an inconvenient disruption to their perfect family narrative. The wedding, with its society connections, photo opportunities, and potential to elevate the family's status through alliance with Bradley's wealthy family, was the priority. Maybe if you'd stayed in Boston instead of moving across the country, we'd feel differently, my mother suggested at one point. But you chose to establish your independence, Leah. You can't just come back when you need something. That statement crystallized everything. My medical emergency was being framed as a choice, a bid for attention, an attempt to sabotage Megan's moment. My parents weren't just unable to help, they were unwilling to recognize the legitimacy of my need. I understand now, I said quietly, interrupting their unified explanation of why I needed to be more self-sufficient. Thank you for making your priorities absolutely clear. I hung up without saying goodbye, then turned off my phone and sobbed until my chest ached almost as much as my heart. The days following that final conversation with my family were some of the darkest I've ever experienced. The physical symptoms of my condition, the fatigue, the swelling, the headaches, seemed to intensify in tandem with my emotional pain, or perhaps I simply had less emotional energy to ignore them. Sam found me curled on my bathroom floor that evening, having called repeatedly, and then used his emergency key when I didn't answer. He helped me to bed, brought water and pain relievers, and sat with me as I recounted the family call through intermittent tears. His reaction was pure righteous anger. How can they do this to you? What kind of parents choose a wedding over their daughter's health? The kind who have always had a favorite, I said softly. And I'm not it. Sam paced my small bedroom, running his hands through his dark hair in frustration. This is beyond favoritism, Leah. This is neglect. It's emotional abuse. His naming of it, abuse, startled me. I'd never applied that word to my family dynamic before. Inequality, yes. Favoritism, certainly. But abuse seemed too harsh, too definitive. Yet as the word hung in the air between us, I felt something shift in my understanding of my childhood and my place in my family. Perhaps the uneven distribution of love and support had never been about my worthiness, but about their limitations. "What am I going to do?" I whispered, the practical reality reasserting itself through my emotional revelation. Sam sat beside me on the bed, taking my hands in his. "We figure this out together. You're not alone in this." The next morning, still exhausted but clearer-headed, we began methodically exploring every possible avenue for funding the surgery. I called the hospital financial services department, who confirmed what I already knew. Even with their most generous payment plan, the monthly amounts would be nearly impossible on my teacher's salary. They suggested medical loans, but the interest rates were predatory, designed to profit from desperation. Sam called his parents that afternoon. Jack and Marie Evans were retired high school teachers living modestly in Arizona. They had welcomed me warmly from our first meeting, always including me in family video calls and sending thoughtful care packages. "They want to help," Sam told me after a lengthy conversation. "They've offered $30,000 from their retirement savings." I protested immediately. They couldn't afford to deplete their retirement for me, but Sam was insistent. "They love you, Leah. Let them help." Those words, so simple yet so profound in contrast to my own family's response, brought fresh tears to my eyes. With Sam's encouragement, I reluctantly agreed to create an online fundraiser. My colleague Amelia helped craft the message, careful to explain the medical necessity while maintaining my privacy and dignity. The elementary school principal, upon learning of my situation, immediately shared it with the entire school community and the district office. The response was overwhelming. Teachers I barely knew donated a day's pay. Parents of current and former students contributed what they could, often with heartfelt notes about the difference I'd made in their children's lives. Local businesses where I'd never shopped matched employee donations. Within 2 weeks, the fundraiser had reached $45,000, a staggering amount that left me humbled and grateful, yet still far short of what was needed. Meanwhile, I took on additional work despite my declining health. I increased my tutoring hours, started an online education blog with affiliate links, and even picked up weekend shifts at a local bookstore. Sam protested that I was pushing myself too hard, but I felt a desperate need to contribute everything I possibly could to my own survival. The physical toll was evident. I lost weight despite the fluid retention. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes. I started experiencing episodes of extreme fatigue where even standing became difficult. Twice I had to leave my classroom mid-lesson when my blood pressure spiked dangerously high. Then came an unexpected lifeline. My mother's sister Catherine called one evening. We'd never been particularly close. She and my mother had a strained relationship, and she rarely attended family functions. I'd always sensed a kinship with her, however, another quiet observer on the periphery of the family spotlight. "Your colleague Amelia found me through social media," she explained after initial pleasantries. "She told me about your condition." I felt a flash of embarrassment that my medical crisis was being discussed with extended family, but Catherine quickly dispelled it. I'm glad she reached out, Leah. I've been in your position, not medically, but as the less favored child. I know exactly how Eleanor and Robert operate. For the next hour, Aunt Catherine shared stories I'd never heard. About her own experiences growing up with my mother, about family dynamics that predated my birth, about patterns of favoritism that had apparently repeated through generations. Your mother was always the golden child, she explained. Pretty social, the one who met our parents' expectations perfectly. I was the disappointment. Too bookish, too independent, too questioning. The parallels to my relationship with Megan were uncanny. When I heard they were refusing to help with your surgery while funding Megan's extravagant wedding, I wasn't surprised. Catherine continued. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. It's the same pattern playing out again. Then she made an offer that left me speechless. I want to help Leah. I've been fortunate in my investments over the years. I can contribute $70,000 toward your surgery. Aunt Catherine, I can't accept that much money from you, I protested, overwhelmed by her generosity. You can and you will, she replied firmly. Consider it my investment in breaking toxic family patterns. And truthfully, using my money to help you while your parents fund another generation of this dysfunction feels like the perfect karma. Between Sam's parents' contribution, the fundraiser, my own savings, and now Aunt Catherine's generous gift, we were approaching the amount needed for the surgery. Dr. Sharma was cautiously optimistic when I updated her on the funding progress. We should be able to schedule you within the next month, she said during my follow-up appointment. Dr. Marcus has reviewed your case and agrees you're an excellent candidate for the procedure. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. The road ahead would still be difficult, major surgery, weeks of recovery, ongoing treatment, but it was a road forward away from the certain decline my condition otherwise promised. It was during this brief period of optimism that the embossed ivory envelope arrived in my mail, a formal invitation to Megan and Bradley's wedding. The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. They couldn't help save my life, but they expected me to celebrate their marriage. I placed the invitation on my kitchen counter and stared at it for days, uncertain how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to cut ties with the family that had made their priorities so painfully clear. Another part, the little girl still seeking approval, still hoping for equal love, wanted to attend to show them I was bigger than their rejection. You don't owe them your presence, Sam said when I showed him the invitation. Your health has to be the priority now. But Aunt Catherine had a different perspective when I called to discuss it. Go, she said simply. Hold your head high and go. Not for them, but for yourself. Show them that their choices haven't broken you. As I considered my options, another reality intruded. My surgery date was finally confirmed for June 14th, just 1 week after Megan's June 7th wedding. If I wanted to attend, I would need to travel cross-country, while my kidney function was at its most precarious, then return immediately to prepare for major surgery. The rational choice was clear: skip the wedding, focus on my health. But family relationships are rarely governed by rationality alone. After much deliberation, I made my decision I would attend the wedding briefly and on my own terms before returning to Portland for my surgery. I marked "will attend" on the RSVP card, adding a note that I would be coming alone as Sam needed to work a white lie. He had offered to come, but I felt this was something I needed to face by myself. I booked the cheapest flights available and reserved a room at a budget hotel 15 minutes from the luxury resort where the wedding would take place. As May turned to June and my departure date approached, I prepared myself physically and emotionally for what lay ahead. I arranged medical clearance for travel, packed my medications, and steeled myself for what would likely be a final reckoning with my family before my surgery changed everything, one way or another. The flight from Portland to Boston was turbulent, both literally and metaphorically. My body, already stressed from the advancing kidney disease, protested the recycled air and prolonged sitting. By the time I landed at Logan Airport and collected my rental car, exhaustion had settled into my bones like a familiar companion. The drive to coastal Maine normally would have been scenic and enjoyable. In my current state, it was an endurance test. I stopped twice to rest at highway service areas, swallowing medication with lukewarm vending machine water and checking my blood pressure with the portable monitor Dr. Sharma had insisted I bring. My budget hotel when I finally arrived was clean but sparse, a far cry from the luxury resort where the rest of the wedding guests would be staying. I collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, setting 3 alarms to ensure I wouldn't sleep through the afternoon rehearsal dinner I'd been invited to but had decided to skip. The rehearsal dinner, a formal affair at the resort's seafood restaurant, felt like too much after the journey. I needed to conserve my limited energy for the wedding itself. Instead, I ordered room service, plain grilled chicken and steamed vegetables that aligned with my restricted renal diet, and spent the evening reviewing the folder of pre-surgical instructions Dr. Sharma had prepared. In less than 72 hours, I would be back in Portland preparing for surgery that might save my kidney function or might prove too late. The contrast between my medical reality and the celebration happening a few miles away couldn't have been starker. Morning brought brief but welcome energy after a solid night's sleep. I dressed carefully in the one formal outfit I'd packed, a simple navy blue dress with a matching jacket that concealed the worst of my edema. My face in the mirror looked pale and puffy, but a careful application of makeup helped camouflage some of the visible signs of my illness. The Ocean View Resort lived up to its name, perched dramatically on Maine's rocky coastline with panoramic views of the Atlantic. As I surrendered my rental car to the valet, I felt acutely aware of the disparity between my economy compact and the luxury vehicles surrounding it. The wedding was scheduled for 4 o'clock with a cocktail hour before and reception to follow. I arrived precisely at 4, slipping into the back row of white chairs arranged on the resort's manicured lawn overlooking the ocean. A string quartet played softly as guests in designer attire mingled and found their seats. The setting was undeniably beautiful. White roses and hydrangeas adorned every surface. Crystal vases caught the afternoon sunlight, gauzy fabric draped elegantly between white columns. It was like a wedding planner's Instagram come to life, perfect in every detail and utterly impersonal. I estimated the cost of the flowers alone would have covered a significant portion of my surgery. My parents and Megan were nowhere to be seen, presumably sequestered in preparation areas. I was grateful for the temporary reprieve, using the time to center myself and rehearse the calm, dignified demeanor I was determined to maintain. A distinguished-looking usher approached, smiling politely. "Are you with the bride or groom?" "Bride," I replied. "I'm her sister." His expression shifted to one of surprised recognition. "Oh, Ms. Matthews, we have you seated at the family table up front." I shook my head. "I'll stay here, thank you. I'm not feeling well and may need to leave early." He looked uncertain but didn't argue, moving on to the next group of arriving guests. The ceremony proceeded with precision-engineered perfection. Bradley and his groomsmen took their places by the flower-covered arch. The string quartet transitioned to Pachelbel's canon as the bridesmaids processed in identical blush gowns that probably cost more than a month of my salary each. My mother appeared on my father's arm. Her silver blonde hair expertly styled her designer Mother of the Bride ensemble exactly the right shade of champagne to complement the wedding colors without competing with the bride. They were seated in the front row without glancing around at the assembled guests. Then came Megan, radiant in a custom gown with a cathedral-length train that required 2 assistants to manage. She was beautiful, there was no denying that, her happiness evident in every step toward her soon-to-be husband. For a moment, watching my sister float down the aisle, I felt a pang of something like grief. Not for what she had that I didn't, but for the relationship we might have had in a different family system. In another reality, I might have been standing beside her as maid of honor, might have helped choose that perfect dress, might have shared in her joy without this undercurrent of hurt and betrayal. The ceremony was brief but elegant. I remained seated when the guests rose for the bride's entrance, my energy already flagging from the effort of being upright and presentable. From my position in the back, I doubted anyone noticed. As the newlyweds recessed to enthusiastic applause, I quietly slipped away from the ceremony site toward the cocktail hour on the adjacent terrace. My plan was simple: make my presence known to my family, offer brief congratulations, and leave before the reception began in earnest. The cocktail hour was in full swing by the time I navigated through the resort's hallways to the oceanfront terrace. Wait staff circulated with trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. A jazz quartet played softly in one corner. Everywhere, guests in expensive attire air-kissed and laughed and commented on the perfect ceremony. I accepted a glass of water from a passing server and positioned myself near the entrance to the main reception hall, knowing my family would eventually pass that way. The effort of standing was already taking its toll, black spots occasionally dancing at the edges of my vision when I moved too quickly. My father spotted me first, his stride faltering mid-step as he guided my mother through the crowd. His expression cycled rapidly through surprise, discomfort, and finally a practiced social smile. "Leah," he said, approaching with my mother in tow. "We weren't sure you were coming." "I RSVP'd," I replied simply. My mother leaned in for an air kiss that didn't quite connect. "You look nice," she said, her eyes cataloging my discount store dress and the visible signs of my illness that makeup couldn't completely conceal. "Thank you. It was a beautiful ceremony." The flowers weren't quite the shade we'd specified. My mother fretted already, looking past me toward more important guests. And the string quartet played the processional slightly too fast, but I suppose most people wouldn't notice. The casual way she critiqued details that had likely cost thousands of dollars while standing before her visibly ill daughter who had been denied medical help was so perfectly on brand that I almost appreciated the consistency. "Where's your young man?" my father asked, glancing around. "Sam wasn't it? He couldn't make it. Work." The lie came easily. "I won't be staying long myself. My flight back is early tomorrow and I have medical appointments to prepare for." A flicker of discomfort crossed my father's face at the mention of my medical situation. "Yes, well, how is all that progressing?" "I'm having surgery next week," I said directly. "We managed to secure funding without disrupting Megan's special day." The implied criticism wasn't lost on either of them. My mother's smile tightened while my father suddenly became very interested in his champagne glass. "Well, that's good news," my mother said brightly, as if we were discussing a minor dental procedure rather than major surgery. "I'm sure everything will work out fine." Before I could respond, my sister appeared in a cloud of white tulle and expensive perfume, surrounded by a protective circle of bridesmaids. She looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Leah, you came?" She air-kissed in my general direction. "Don't you look well?" The hesitation before "well" spoke volumes. "Congratulations, Megan. It was a beautiful ceremony." "Wasn't it perfect?" She beamed, immediately launching into a detailed account of minor disasters averted and special touches the ordinary guest might have missed. Not once did she ask how I was feeling or mention my upcoming surgery. I stood there nodding and making appropriate noises of appreciation, while the room occasionally tilted alarmingly around me. My father had drifted away to speak with what appeared to be Bradley's parents, while my mother hovered nervously, clearly torn between supervising Megan's interactions with guests and monitoring my potentially embarrassing presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced a tuxedoed master of ceremonies, "please begin making your way to the grand ballroom. We'll be seating for dinner shortly." "That's my cue," I said, taking a step back from my sister and mother. "I should be going." Megan looked confused. "Going? But the reception is just starting. We have a 5-course dinner and the band is amazing. They played at the governor's inauguration." "I'm not feeling well enough to stay," I said honestly. "I just wanted to see the ceremony and congratulate you." "But you haven't even seen the reception space," my mother protested. "The ice sculptures just arrived and the lighting design is spectacular." Their concern for my missing their expensive decorations, rather than acknowledging my health, confirmed I'd made the right decision to leave early. "I'm sure it's all wonderful," I said. "But my doctor advised against overexertion before my surgery, and I've already pushed my limits today." Megan's expression darkened slightly. "You're not going to make a scene about your medical issues today, are you?" "This is my wedding, Leah." "No scene," I assured her, summoning the last of my energy to keep my voice steady. "I came to support you despite everything, and now I'm leaving quietly. That's all." I might have made my exit then with minimal drama had the master of ceremonies not chosen that moment to call for the wedding party to enter the ballroom for introductions. As Megan was whisked away by her bridesmaids and my mother hurried after them, I found myself caught in the general migration toward the reception. The grand ballroom was a showpiece of excess. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Centerpieces of white roses and orchids towered over each table. Ice sculptures of swans flanked a massive head table on a raised platform. A 12-piece band was positioned on a custom-built stage. The estimated cost of this single evening could have funded multiple surgeries like mine. I found myself swept along with the crowd as everyone took their assigned seats. Not wanting to create a disruption by leaving immediately, I located an unoccupied chair at a back table and sat down planning to slip out after the introductions. The wedding party's entrance was choreographed like a Broadway production, each bridesmaid and groomsman introduced with personal anecdotes and entering to individually selected music. My parents were announced as the people who made this fairy tale possible, walking into enthusiastic applause. Finally, Megan and Bradley made their grand entrance descending a staircase as artificial snow in June floated down around them. They proceeded directly into their first dance, a choreographed routine to a song performed live by a minor pop star I vaguely recognized. The spectacle was impressive, I had to admit. Every detail had been considered, every expense justified in service of creating this perfect moment. As I watched my sister twirl in her new husband's arms, I couldn't help but wonder what it must feel like to be valued so completely, to have your desires prioritized so absolutely. Dinner service began, each course more elaborate than the last, paired with specific wines selected by a sommelier. I declined everything except water, my restricted diet, and nausea making the rich food impossible anyway. I was contemplating the least obtrusive moment to leave when my father approached the microphone for his toast. He spoke eloquently about Megan's accomplishments, about her perfect match in Bradley, about their bright future together. He thanked the assembled guests for sharing in the most important day in our family's history. Those words, casual, thoughtless, hit me like a physical blow. More important than my birth, more important than my graduation, more important than my survival. I was gathering my purse to leave when my father delivered his final surprise. "And now," he said, raising his champagne flute, "Bradley's parents and Eleanor and I have one more gift for the newlyweds." Bradley's father joined mine at the microphone, both men beaming with pride. "We're delighted to announce," my father continued, "that we've purchased a starter home for Megan and Bradley in Beacon Hill." Gasps and applause swept through the room. Beacon Hill was one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods, where even modest homes started at well over $1 million. "Consider it a down payment on your future," Bradley's father added. "We couldn't be prouder to join our families together." Megan's squeal of delight was audible even over the applause. She rushed to hug both sets of parents, her face alight with genuine surprise and joy. I sat frozen, the room swimming around me. My parents had refused to help fund my life-saving surgery because they claimed they couldn't compromise on Megan's wedding expenses. Yet they had apparently had enough additional funds to contribute to $1 million property without mentioning it to me. The revelation went beyond favoritism or poor priorities. It was a deliberate choice to withhold life-saving help while having abundant resources. They had lied to me not because they couldn't help, but because they didn't want to. I don't remember standing or walking toward the head table. I only remember suddenly being there facing my family and the confused expressions of those around them. "You had the money all along," I said, my voice somehow steady despite the emotion coursing through me. "You let me believe you couldn't help with my surgery because of the wedding, but you were planning to buy them a house too." My mother's face drained of color. "Leah, this isn't the time or place." "When is the time?" I asked, not raising my voice but somehow cutting through the awkward silence that had fallen over the nearby tables. "When I'm on dialysis. When I'm on a transplant list. When exactly would it be convenient for you to acknowledge that you chose a party and real estate over my health?" My father moved toward me, his expression a warning. "Leah, you're making a scene at your sister's wedding. We can discuss this privately later." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied, a strange calm settling over me. "Your priorities are perfectly clear. I just wanted to thank you for finally being honest about them." I turned to my sister, whose perfect day was momentarily marred by this unexpected confrontation. "Congratulations, Megan. I hope your new home brings you joy. I'll be in the hospital next week fighting for my life, but I'm sure the housewarming party will be lovely." With that, I walked out of the ballroom through the lobby and into the cool evening air. Behind me, I could hear my mother calling my name, then my father's deeper voice saying something about always being dramatic. I didn't look back. My rental car was brought around by a valet who seemed concerned by my pale complexion but said nothing. I drove carefully back to my budget hotel, packed my few belongings, and checked out a day early. That night, I slept in a highway motel halfway to Boston, where I would catch an earlier flight back to Portland the next morning. As I lay in the anonymous motel room watching headlights occasionally sweep across the ceiling, I felt something unexpected relief. The final illusion about my place in my family had been shattered, but with that shattering came a strange freedom. I no longer needed to wonder where I stood or hope for equal treatment. The truth, however painful, was clarifying. I texted Sam a brief update, then Aunt Catherine. Both responded with immediate support and concern for my well-being. These connections, chosen family rather than biological, would be my foundation moving forward. As I drifted toward sleep, my phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected source, my father. "Your behavior tonight was unacceptable. When you're ready to apologize to your sister and mother for ruining a special moment, we can discuss rebuilding our relationship." I stared at the message, marveling at how perfectly it encapsulated everything wrong with our family dynamic. In his reality, my request for life-saving help was less important than Megan's special moment. My pointing out their deception was a greater sin than their abandonment of me in a medical crisis. I didn't respond. Some bridges once revealed as rotten shouldn't be rebuilt, but abandoned entirely. As I turned off my phone and closed my eyes, I felt the first tentative steps toward a future where I valued myself, even if my family of origin never would. The surgery took place exactly as scheduled 1 week after Megan's wedding. Sam drove me to the hospital before dawn, both of us quiet with nervous anticipation. The procedure would take approximately 6 hours, with several more in recovery, before I would be moved to a regular room. "I'll be right here when you wake up," Sam promised as the pre-op nurse came to take me to the surgical floor. "Your Aunt Catherine is flying in this afternoon. We've got everything covered." I squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for his steady presence. "I love you." "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Now go get those kidneys fixed." The surgical team was efficient and compassionate, explaining each step as they prepared me for anesthesia. Dr. Marcus, the specialist who had flown in specifically for my procedure, visited briefly to review the surgical plan one final time. "We've caught this just in time," he said, reviewing my latest test results. "Another month of decline and our options would have been much more limited." As the anesthesia began to take effect, I had a moment of perfect clarity. Every person in that operating room, from Dr. Marcus to the surgical techs to the nurses monitoring my vitals, cared more about keeping me alive than my own parents did. It was a devastating realization, but also strangely peaceful. I was in good hands, even if they weren't the hands that should have caught me when I fell. I woke hours later in the recovery room, groggy and in pain, but alive. The surgery had been successful, Dr. Marcus had removed the worst of the scarring and repaired damaged portions of my kidneys. Recovery would be long and challenging, with no guarantees about how much function would ultimately return, but I had been given a fighting chance. The days that followed were a blur of pain medication, vital sign checks, and brief, exhausted conversations with Sam and Aunt Catherine, who took shifts staying with me around the clock. Sam's parents called daily, as did several colleagues and friends from my school. My family of origin remained conspicuously silent. No flowers, no calls, no messages of concern or wishes for recovery. Their absence, while painful, confirmed the wisdom of my decision to stop expecting what they had never been capable of giving. 1 week post-surgery, as I was being discharged with a detailed recovery plan and medication regimen, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We hope your procedure went well. When you're feeling better, we should discuss your behavior at the wedding. Megan and Bradley are very upset." I showed the message to Sam, who had been helping me pack my few belongings from the hospital room. "Are you kidding me?" he exploded, reading it twice as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something more appropriate. "That's what she has to say after you had major surgery. It's actually helpful," I said, surprising myself with the realization. "It removes any doubt or guilt I might have felt about distancing myself from them." Sam looked at me with concern. "Are you okay with that? Really okay?" I considered the question carefully as the discharge nurse arrived with a wheelchair. "I think I'm getting there," I finally said. "I'm grieving the family I wished I had, not the one I actually have." The recovery process was grueling. 6 weeks of severely restricted activity, daily medication with unpleasant side effects, weekly blood tests to monitor kidney function. Through it all, my chosen family surrounded me with practical and emotional support. Sam took family leave to care for me during the critical first 2 weeks. Aunt Catherine stayed for a month in a nearby Airbnb, cooking meals that adhered to my renal diet and providing company during long days of limited mobility. Sam's parents sent care packages and helped financially with medical expenses not covered by insurance. My school community continued their support as well. A meal train ensured fresh food appeared regularly at our door. Cards and small gifts from students brightened difficult days. The principal arranged for my medical leave to extend through the summer, holding my position for the fall semester if my recovery progressed as hoped. 3 months after surgery, my kidney function had improved enough that Dr. Sharma spoke cautiously of long-term stability rather than progressive decline. I still faced a lifetime of careful monitoring, medication, and dietary restrictions, but the immediate threat had passed. It was during this period of physical healing that I began the harder work of emotional recovery. With Sam's encouragement, I started seeing a therapist specializing in family trauma. Dr. Rivera helped me recognize patterns I'd normalized my entire life, from the subtle favoritism of my childhood to the outright neglect of my medical crisis. "What you're describing is emotional neglect," she explained during one session. "Your physical needs were met, but your emotional needs were consistently sacrificed for your sister's wants. That creates deep wounds that don't just disappear because you intellectually understand what happened." She was right. Understanding the dynamics intellectually was one thing. Processing the grief, anger, and sense of abandonment was quite another. Some sessions left me emotionally drained, reliving painful memories I'd suppressed for years. Others brought unexpected clarity and even compassion for my parents' limitations. "They're products of their own upbringing," Aunt Catherine explained during one of our now regular phone calls. "Your grandmother did the same to your mother that she did to Megan, created a golden child who never had to face consequences or consider others' needs. They don't know any different." "That explains it but doesn't excuse it," I replied. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. Understanding the why doesn't obligate you to accept the what." My parents made sporadic attempts at contact over those months, each message focused on my inappropriate behavior at the wedding and the need for me to apologize before we could move forward as a family. I saved the messages but rarely responded, each one reinforcing my decision to maintain distance. Megan sent a single text shortly after returning from her honeymoon. "I hope you're feeling better. Mom and Dad are really hurt by what you said at our wedding." No mention of my surgery or recovery, no acknowledgement of their choices or deception, just continued expectation that I would maintain the family pattern of prioritizing her feelings above all else. I replied simply, "I'm recovering slowly but steadily. I'm glad you enjoyed your honeymoon." Neither of us contacted the other after that exchange. 6 months post-surgery, I returned to teaching on a part-time basis. The physical stamina wasn't fully there yet, but being back in the classroom brought joy and purpose that accelerated my overall recovery. My first graders were delighted to have me back, their innocent enthusiasm for learning, reminding me daily why I'd chosen this path, despite my family's dismissal of it. It was during this period of rebuilding my life that Sam proposed. Nothing elaborate or showy, just the two of us on a gentle hike to a viewpoint overlooking Portland, the fall colors painting the landscape in warm golds and reds. "You know, I'm still a medical work in progress," I warned him as he slipped his grandmother's vintage ring onto my finger. Annual specialists' visits, medication for life, no guarantees about long-term prognosis. And you know I'm a nurse who understands all of that, he countered. I'm not marrying your medical chart, Leah. I'm marrying you, the woman who faced abandonment by her family and still found the strength to fight for her life and her dignity. The woman who shows up for her students every day with creativity and patience despite everything she's been through. We planned a small ceremony for the following spring, just close friends Sam's family and Aunt Catherine. I debated for weeks whether to invite my parents and Megan, eventually deciding to send simple announcements after the fact rather than invitations. Their presence would bring tension to a day that deserved joy, and I no longer felt obligated to maintain the fiction of normal family relationships. When the announcements were met with hurt messages about exclusion, I felt momentary guilt, but greater confirmation that I'd made the right choice. They remained focused on perceived slights against them rather than celebrating a positive development in my life. As spring approached, bringing with it both my wedding date and the one-year anniversary of my surgery, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. Physically, I was stronger than I'd been in years. My kidney function stabilized at about 70% of normal. Not perfect, but sustainable with proper care. Emotionally, I'd developed resilience I never knew I possessed, and boundaries I never knew I needed. The most profound change, however, was in my understanding of family. The people who had gathered around me in crisis, Sam and his parents, Aunt Catherine, my colleagues and friends, had demonstrated what genuine family support looks like. They had given freely without expectation of return, prioritized my well-being above convenience, and respected my autonomy while offering help. My wedding day dawned clear and mild, the ceremony held in a small botanical garden with 30 guests in attendance. Sam's father officiated, his mother read a poem, and Aunt Catherine presented us with a quilt she had made from fabric contributed by everyone important in our lives. There were no ice sculptures or designer gowns, no five-course dinner, or celebrity entertainment. Just authentic celebration, heartfelt vows, and the palpable love of people who had chosen to be family to each other. During the reception, I stepped away briefly for a moment alone, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no wedding planner could have arranged. My phone buzzed with a text, my mother responding to the wedding announcement they'd received that morning. I hope you'll reconsider these boundaries you've created once you have children of your own. Family should stay together no matter what. I considered her words, recognizing the worldview that had shaped my childhood. Family as obligation rather than choice, loyalty demanded regardless of treatment patterns perpetuated across generations. Looking back at the gathering where Sam was laughing with my school principal while Aunt Catherine taught one of my colleagues a dance move, I felt deep gratitude for the alternative definition of family. I'd discovered people who show up for each other in crisis and celebration alike, who make space for growth and healing, who love without conditions or comparisons. I turned off my phone without replying and rejoined my chosen family, stepping into a future built on that wiser, more generous understanding of what love really means. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who couldn't meet your needs? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. This journey taught me that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. If this resonated with you, please subscribe and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve support and love, especially during health crises. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself and those who genuinely care about you.